Whenever you think of Super Bowl contenders, there's a couple of teams that immediately pop into your head. Whether it's the Chiefs, Bengals, or Bills on the AFC side, or the Eagles and 49ers on the NFC side, these 5 teams are not the only contenders in each of their conferences. And in fact, there's several other teams that are being slept on at the moment and could make serious noise in the 2023 NFL season. And that is of course relative to the expectations that each team has entering the year. Winning a Super Bowl for any team in today's era is insanely difficult, and hell, for as good as Josh Allen and the Bills are, they have not made a Super Bowl in this era, and that's not a shot or a diss at them as much as it is to acknowledge how damn difficult it is just to get to the big game. And in today's video, we're going to discuss 4 teams that are flying under the radar, and there is a lot to discuss in today's video, and without further ado, let's begin. And we are starting today's video with the Denver Broncos. It's pretty easy to forget about the Broncos heading into the 2023 season because they had such a bad 2022 season. They made a blockbuster trade to acquire former Seahawks quarterback Russell Wilson, thinking he would be the final piece for their roster and that they would not only be able to compete for the AFC West, but win the AFC West and eventually win a Super Bowl. And their season went well, really as off script as possible from the start, as they finished 32nd in points per game and were 3-10 through 13 games and ultimately finished with a 5-12 record. Head coach Nathaniel Hackett was fired before season's end, and their season could not end soon enough. They had several nightmare games and scenarios, whether it was the game clock fiasco at the end of the Seahawks game in Week 1, which ironically would foreshadow how their season would play out, or what was one of the worst games any of us have seen in that dreaded Colts game in Week 5, in which they lost 12-9, or better yet, the Christmas Day game against the Rams in which they would lose 51-14. It was a truly terrible season for Denver, but things are looking up in a big way entering 2023. For starters, while yes, Russell Wilson did not play well in 2022, and I'm not shying away from that or making excuses for him, his offensive line was not good by any means either, as he was sacked 55 times in 15 games. And that's not an excuse for Russ, as both he and the offensive line can both play poor. Russ was tied with Justin Fields for being sacked the most in the NFL, and we all know how the Bears' 2022 season went, and the next highest quarterback in terms of being sacked was Kirk Cousins and Geno Smith, with being sacked 46 times apiece. 9 sacks is a substantial amount over the course of a season because, more often than not, sacks are drive killers. And I do credit the Broncos in a big way for going out and addressing this offseason, as they brought in guard Ben Powers and tackle Mike McGlinchey from the 49ers. And I know people are going to say McGlinchey isn't that good, but the most important thing here was he was an upgrade and he would have been better than a 3rd or 4th round rookie tackle, and you have to remember the Broncos did not have a 1st or 2nd round pick because of the Russell Wilson trade. So they got better on the offensive line with the available resources they had. Not only did they get better there, but they brought in Sean Payton to be their head coach, and you would have to think, really by default, that they will get better offensively. And it's impossible to get worse from a points per game standpoint, as they finished dead last year, and by the offense getting better, the defense will be more rested, and the Broncos defense was very good through the first 13 or so games last year, and there was a point in time where the Broncos would have been 8-1 if they scored a measly 20 points per game through the first 9 games. And because Denver is in the AFC West, people will ask the question, can they win the division over the Chiefs? And the answer, generally speaking, is probably not, but people are already writing Denver off before the season starts, and they should not. And they are a pretty underrated team heading into the season. Next up is the Atlanta Falcons, and there were some comments on Sunday's video about how the Falcons should have been in the most improved teams video, and there certainly is a case for them. Atlanta had a very good offseason, and admittedly I have been critical of this team in the past, which we'll get to, but before we do, I want to discuss why they are underrated. In today's NFL, a lot of teams zig while the Falcons are very much zagging, and because they're not doing the standard approach in today's NFL, which which is usually draft a quarterback high and figure everything out later, a lot of people are out on Atlanta before the season starts due to Desmond Ridder being the quarterback. But when you have talent on the offense like Bijan Robinson, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts, the quarterback has to simply not lose the team games. That's it. As long as Desmond Ridder isn't throwing the ball into triple coverage or throwing pick sixes left and right, the Falcons are going to be in nearly every game, and honestly they were in nearly every game last year, and still finished 7-10 with Marcus Mariota playing very pedestrian through the first 13 games. The only game they truly lost was the Bengals game, and when you have a bad defense, which the 2022 Falcons did, and you catch Joe Burrow on a day where he throws for nearly 500 yards and 3 touchdowns, with Marcus Mariota as your quarterback on the road, you're going to lose that game, period. But why I think the Falcons are flying under the radar and why they are such an underrated team is they have a two-headed monster in Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier at running back, and in today's NFL, I absolutely love that strategy. Their offensive line is very much a kick-ass and take-names-later bunch led by the 2022 second-team All-Pro Chris Lindstrom, and if they're running the ball right down your throat, which they did to a lot of teams in 2022, as they finished third in the NFL in rushing last year, it's going to be a long day for a lot of teams. And this goes back to the Falcons' zagging standpoint, where a lot of defenses simply aren't built to play offenses like this. They will stack 8 or 9 guys in the box and hope they can stop either Bijan or Algier, and if they don't, or if in the scenario head coach Arthur Smith calls a play-action pass, which will happen a lot in 2023, he has a 6'6", 240-pound unit in Kyle Pitts to get the ball to. Both Bijan and Kyle Pitts are going to eat in 2023, and their offensive strategy will very much be to chew the clock and to grind teams down. And as long as the defense is average, and again, Desmond doesn't throw them out of games, the Falcons can implement this strategy and get to 10 or 11 wins, and ultimately the playoffs. They remind me so much of the Titans from 2019, and I do not doubt the Falcons winning the NFC South in 2023. They improved their defense quite a bit as well from 22 to 23, and they are going to be a pain in the ass for not just a team or two, but for everyone to play. And from Atlanta to Baltimore, we go to discuss the Ravens. Baltimore may seem like an unusual pick for underrated teams heading into the season, but with the Bengals in their division, and especially with how the last 2 Ravens seasons have ended, people seem to forget that they are almost always in the thick of the playoffs and amongst the league's best. And a preface for Baltimore, this is of course dependent on Lamar Jackson playing all 17 games or very close to all 17 games, meaning he can't play 12 games like he has in back-to-back years and expect the Ravens to win 13 or 14 games. But with Baltimore, something a lot of people may not realize or simply choose not to talk about is they finished third in the NFL in points allowed per game last year, which is huge, especially in the AFC. They finished second in the NFL in rushing yards as an offense with over 2,700 yards, and the way the Ravens win a lot of games is simply by running the football, playing good defense, and wearing teams down. And when you have a former MVP winning quarterback in Lamar Jackson and one of the best tight ends in the NFL in Mark Andrews, that makes everyone's job a lot easier. And they did not beat the Bengals by accident last year when they came to Baltimore in Week 5, and if these teams are fully healthy in 2023, I would not put it past the Ravens winning the division. Because Cincinnati has been so good over the past 2 years, and good for them by the way, there's almost this belief that, oh yeah, it doesn't matter because the Bengals will win the division no matter what, and I don't think that's necessarily the case. Could they? Yes, but I don't think it's a slam dunk heading into the year the way it is sometimes perceived. Baltimore also got better from a receiving standpoint this offseason as they brought in Odell Beckham and Zay Flowers, and with new offensive coordinator Todd Monken in the building, I do expect the Ravens to finish better than 19th in points per game, which is where they did 1 year ago. The leading receiver on their roster last year was Demarcus Robinson with a paltry 458 receiving yards, followed by Devin Duvernay, who is mostly a return man, and the reality is you're not going to beat a lot of the premier teams in the NFL with those guys as your leading receivers, at least when it matters most. So for Baltimore, a team that has had terrible injury luck over the past few years, if they can simply stay healthy throughout the regular season, well, as we know, anything can happen in January. Next up is the Minnesota Vikings, and hear me out on this because there's a lot to unpack. Everyone sees the Vikings unloading veterans left and right, whether it was fan favorite Adam Thielen, Dalvin Cook, Zadarius Smith, or Eric Kendricks, but these were moves that more or less had to be made. Adam Thielen was going to be a 33-year-old receiver who was going to be owed nearly $20 million, and while Thielen still has a cap hit of $13.5 million this year, it saved the team over $6 million by cutting him. And no matter how you slice it, a player that had 716 receiving yards at 32 years old and is only expected to decline as he gets older was not worth the contract. And for anybody saying, well, they should have traded him, who willingly wanted to take on that contract and pay a 33-year-old receiver $20 million per year? The answer was nobody, and that's the reason why Thielen was released. Zadarius Smith tweeted that he was done with the team, which was certainly a strategy in terms of how to let people know you won out, but the point is he is now a Brown. Dalvin Cook declined towards the end of the 2022 season, as in the final 8 games of the year, he averaged just 3.75 yards per carry, had just 2 rushing touchdowns, and had 0 100-yard games. So having said all of this, there's a lot of people that have automatically assumed they're done, which is a continuation of the belief that they were already frauds throughout the 2022 season. So we're at the point now where people completely dismiss the Vikings and just say, oh, well, they're back to the way they were in 2020 and 2021, and they'll finish 7-10 or 8-9 because the Lions will win the division and Minnesota will miss the playoffs. And the reason we say not so fast to this is Minnesota finished 28th in points per game allowed last year, which was tied with the Colts and Lions, and there were games where the defense did not look like an NFL caliber defense. They played the same old cover 6 for most of the year, and they allowed the second most passing yards in the entire NFL behind only the Titans. And when people discuss the Vikings in 2023, there's no acknowledgement that, hey, they signed Byron Murphy in the offseason, or hey, they brought in Brian Flores to be their defensive coordinator, or hey, they're getting 2022 first-round pick Lewis Cine back healthy. People just assume they're going to be, for lack of a better word, as shitty as they were defensively 1 year ago. And because they got lucky time after time after time in the regular season, that we can go ahead and write off the Vikings before the season even starts. The Vikings also finished 27th in rushing yards in 2022, and by extending fullback CJ Ham and bringing in Josh Oliver as a blocking tight end, they too will look to emphasize the run more this year and to try and wear teams down when they can. They'll use more 21 personnel this year, or even 22 personnel, with both Oliver and Ham on the field, while still having the 2022 Offensive Player of the Year in Justin Jefferson at receiver, meaning their offense is going to be harder to stop because it's going to be harder to game plan against. Now, the golden question is, will Minnesota win the Super Bowl this year? Probably not, no. But for where the perception around this team is right now, they are most certainly one of the more underrated NFL teams. Only about 27% of people watching are subscribed, so if you are enjoying, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, as it only takes a second to do and helps the growth tremendously. Until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.